The moment my son looked at me and sighed with relief instead of concern, I knew everything. I had just told him I had lost my house, my savings, and every dollar I ever worked for. A mother expects panic, fear, maybe even tears. But what I saw in his eyes was something colder, calculation, almost freedom. My heart did not break loudly. It cracked quietly, like glass under pressure. In that second, a terrifying question burned inside my chest. Did he ever love me, or did he only love what I owned? I did not confront him. I smiled. And that was the most dangerous part. My name is Eleanor Wright, and I am 62 years old. I have spent most of my life believing that if you loved hard enough, gave generously enough, and sacrificed quietly enough, your family would return that love when it mattered most. I built my life around that belief. It shaped every decision I made. And it was the very belief that nearly destroyed me. I raised my son Michael alone after his father passed away when Michael was just 8. There was no dramatic goodbye, no chance to prepare. One day my husband was healthy, laughing in our kitchen, and the next he was gone. A sudden stroke. Doctors called it unpredictable. To me, it felt like the ground had opened and swallowed my future whole. But I did not fall apart. I could not afford to. I had a child who needed me, so I became strong in ways I never imagined. I worked longer hours, I slept less. I carried grief like a hidden weight in my chest and kept going. Michael became my purpose. Every achievement of mine was tied to him. Every dollar I saved, every late night I survived, every dream I postponed was for his future. I told myself that one day, when he was grown, he would understand. That he would see the quiet sacrifices and honor them with gratitude. That hope carried me through decades. We lived in a modest home that I eventually paid off. I built a comfortable savings account. Not extravagant, but secure. Enough that I no longer feared the future. Enough that I believed I had finally earned a season of peace. I had insurance, investments. Well prepared carefully. Everything was in order. Everything I owned was meant to protect my son when I was gone, and that was the problem. I did not notice when the conversation shifted. I did not notice when Michael stopped asking how I was and started asking what I had. It happened slowly, like a shadow creeping across a room. First, it was casual curiosity. Did you update your will yet? Then it became suggestions. Should think about selling the house one day. Property values are high. Then subtle entitlement. When this place is mine, I will remodel the kitchen. Each comment landed lightly, but together they built a pattern. And patterns tell the truth long before words do. Michael was 35 by then, educated, employed, independent, or so I believed. He visited more often than he used to, but something about his presence felt different. He looked around my home with new eyes, measuring, calculating, as if every wall carried a price tag only he could see. I tried to ignore the feeling. A mother does not want to believe her own child is capable of selfishness. It is easier to call it imagination than to accept it might be reality. Still, unease settled into my bones. One evening, while we sat at the dining table, he casually asked how much my life insurance policy was worth. He said it with the same tone someone might ask about the weather. My fork paused midair. My heart thudded once, hard enough that I felt it in my throat. I answered vaguely. He smiled, not warmly. Satisfied, that smile followed me into my sleep that night. I began paying attention. I noticed how his visits aligned with financial discussions. I noticed how his interest in my health only came after questions about assets. I noticed how his concern was performative, like an actor rehearsing compassion. The way his eyes never lingered on my face, but always drifted toward the house around us. And the more I noticed, the more a terrible thought formed. What if I was no longer his mother? What if I was simply a vault waiting to be opened? I still loved him. That never disappeared. But love does not blind forever. Eventually, it sharpens into something more painful. Awareness I had built everything for him. The house, the savings, the security. And now I began to wonder if I had unknowingly taught him something dangerous. That patience could be replaced by expectation. That love could be measured in dollars. The injustice was not loud, was quiet, subtle, emotional. A slow betrayal unfolding behind polite smiles and casual conversations. And the stakes were not money alone. They were my dignity, my worth, my identity as a mother. Because if Michael only saw my value in what I owned, then everything I sacrificed had been reduced to a transaction. I did not confront him, not yet. I watched, I listened. And in that waiting, a plan began to take shape. One I never imagined I would need. The moment I decided to test the truth was the moment my role changed forever. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me until the end. Because what I discovered changed how I see love, loyalty, and family forever. Michael became more attentive after that, but not in the way a son becomes attentive to his mother. His calls were frequent, yet shallow. He did not ask how I slept. He asked if I had spoken to my financial advisor. He did not ask if I was lonely. He asked if the property taxes had increased. Each conversation felt like a transaction disguised as concern, and every time I hung up the phone, a quiet ache settled deeper in my chest. One afternoon, he arrived unannounced. I was folding laundry when I heard his car pull into the driveway. The sound used to comfort me. Now it tightened my stomach. He walked through the door with forced cheerfulness, his smile practiced, his eyes scanning the room before they ever met mine. He commented on the furniture, the shelves, the small changes I had made, as though inventory mattered more than my presence. When he finally hugged me, his arms felt stiff, his touch brief, almost impatient. I offered him tea. He declined and went straight into conversation about money. He asked if I had updated my will again, whether I had named an executor, whether I had considered transferring assets while I was still alive. The words fell from his mouth casually, but their weight crushed the air between us. I nodded, vague, non-committal, watching him closely. His posture straightened with every financial detail, like a hunter following a trail. That was when I realized his visits were no longer about me. He no longer asked if I needed anything. He asked what I planned to leave behind. Another week passed, then another. His visits increased. His patience thinned. I noticed how his tone sharpened when I avoided specifics. How his eyes darkened when I changed the subject. There was a tension beneath his politeness, like a wire pulled too tight. He wanted certainty, he wanted control, and he wanted it soon. One evening, he brought his girlfriend with him. She was pleasant, quiet, observant. I saw how she watched Michael as he spoke, how she followed his lead, how she laughed when he laughed, even when nothing was funny. When the conversation turned to inheritance again, she leaned forward slightly, as if the words themselves held promise. That moment told me everything I needed to know. This was no longer just his hunger. It was shared, encouraged, reinforced. I felt suddenly small in my own home. They spoke as if I were not there, as if I were already a memory. They discussed renovations, future plans, how the house would look after certain changes. After, not if. When, the word echoed inside me like a quiet threat. I sat at the table, hands folded, listening to my own life being redesigned by people who believed it already belonged to them. I smiled. I always smiled. And every smile became a shield. One night after they left, I walked through my home slowly. I touched the walls, the furniture, the photographs. Every item held memories of sacrifice. Late nights, missed vacations, silent struggles. And now those memories were being reduced to numbers in my son's private calculations. The injustice felt heavier than anger. It felt like erasure. Days later, Michael called again. This time his tone was impatient. He asked if I had met with my attorney. He asked if I had made decisions yet. When I told him I was still thinking, silence stretched between us. a thick, uncomfortable silence. Then he sighed, long and sharp, as if my existence had become inconvenient. That sigh was louder than any insult. I began to understand the depth of his entitlement. Not hope, not trust, ownership. He believed what I had built was already his. He was merely waiting for me to step aside. Another visit followed. He brought documents, printed charts, numbers highlighted in bold. He laid them on my table like evidence in a trial. My trial. He spoke quickly, confidently, as if the outcome was inevitable. My role was no longer mother. I was an obstacle. I nodded. I listened. I thanked him for his concern. Inside, something hardened. I realized then that I was no longer observing. I was preparing, because the more he revealed his impatience, the clearer my path became. And the closer he came to believing victory was guaranteed, the closer he was to discovering how wrong he was. He did not see it. He never did. The moment that broke me did not arrive in anger. It arrived in silence. A quiet, ordinary afternoon that should have meant nothing. I was sitting by the window, watching the sunlight stretch across the floor, when my phone rang. It was Michael. I answered with the hope that never fully dies in a mother's heart. Maybe this time he would ask how I was. Maybe this time he would sound like my son again. He did not. He asked if I had finalized anything with the attorney. No greeting, no warmth, just business. I felt something shift inside my chest, like a door closing slowly but permanently. I told him I had been feeling unwell and needed time. He paused, not with concern, but with irritation. Then he said something that cut deeper than any accusation ever could. Well, do not wait too long. These things should be settled while you still can. While you still can. The words stayed with me long after the call ended. They followed me into the kitchen, into my bedroom. Into my dreams. They did not sound like care. They sounded like pressure, like a clock ticking in his favor. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been avoiding. If I were gone tomorrow, would he grieve me or celebrate the freedom I represented? That question did not hurt. It clarified. I realized then that I was standing at a crossroads. I could continue pretending, continue softening his intentions with excuses, or I could finally see him as he was showing himself to be. The second choice was terrifying, but it was also honest. And honesty had a strange way of awakening strength I had forgotten I possessed. That night, I opened my safe. I took out every document, deeds, insurance papers, bank statements. I spread them across the dining table like pieces of my own life. I studied them not as a mother, but as a woman who had earned everything she owned. For the first time, I felt protective not of my son, but of myself. That shift was powerful. I remembered every sacrifice that built those papers, every meal I skipped, every vacation I declined, every exhaustion I carried silently. I had not built a fortune. I had built security, dignity, independence, and now someone was trying to claim it as entitlement. I closed the safe, and in that moment, my decision was made. I would not confront him with anger. I would not accuse him without proof. I would give him the chance to show the truth completely. I would test the one thing he could not fake: loss. If love existed, it would surface when everything was gone. Greed ruled him, it would reveal itself instantly. The next morning, I rehearsed the words in my head. They tasted bitter even before I spoke them. I imagined his reaction, his voice, his eyes. I told myself I was ready. But readiness does not erase fear. It only gives it direction. When I finally called him, my hands were steady. My voice was calm. I told him there had been problems, that my investments had collapsed, that legal fees had drained my savings, that the house might have to be sold. I let silence sit after each sentence. He did not panic. He did not ask if I was safe. He did not ask if I needed help. He exhaled slowly, as if relieved. That exhale told me everything before he even spoke. In that breath, I felt the last illusion die. The son I believed in existed only in memory. The man on the phone was someone else. Someone calculating, someone free of obligation. Someone who saw my loss as his release. I ended the call politely. I sat alone in my living room, heart pounding, stomach hollow. I felt grief. But beneath it, something new emerged. Control. Because now I knew. And knowing was power. I was no longer guessing. I was no longer hoping. I was no longer afraid to face what came next. The test had begun. And he had already started failing it. I moved carefully, slowly. Precision mattered now. Every step had to feel real. Every detail had to be believable. Revenge was not loud, was quiet, patient, and invisible until it was finished. First, I met with my attorney, not the one Michael knew, a different one, across town. I walked into that office with my spine straight and my voice steady. I told her everything, the questions, the pressure, the relief in his voice when I mentioned loss. She listened without interrupting, her pen still, her eyes sharp. When I finished, she nodded once. "You are not testing him," she said softly. "You are protecting yourself." That sentence stayed with me. We created a temporary trust. Everything remained mine, but nothing would be accessible without my approval. Then we prepared a revised will. One that reflected reality, not hope. The ink felt heavier than any signature I had ever written, but it also felt honest. Next came the illusion. I called Michael again. My voice trembled just enough. Told him the bank had confirmed the losses. I told him the house was listed. I told him I was considering downsizing to a small apartment. I waited. There it was. The pause, not grief, not concern, relief. "Oh," he said quietly, "that is unfortunate. Unfortunate. Like bad weather, like traffic. Not like the collapse of his mother's life." I heard papers shuffle on his end. I imagined him recalculating, adjusting, letting go. He did not offer help. He offered distance. In the following days, his calls stopped. His visits disappeared. The silence was louder than any argument. My house felt different without him. Quieter, safer. Each empty day confirmed what my heart already knew. Then I made the final move. I invited him to dinner. His reply came hours later. Short, detached. Sure. No enthusiasm. No warmth. When he arrived, I had already set the stage. The house looked partially emptied, boxes stacked, shelves bare. The living room echoed. The illusion of loss was everywhere. I wore simple clothes, no jewelry, no confidence. Only weariness. He looked around, not with sadness, with detachment. "So it is really happening," he said. "Yes," I replied. No comfort followed, only acceptance. Dinner was quiet. He barely touched his food. His eyes kept drifting to the walls, the floors, the spaces where value used to exist. Then he leaned back and said something that finally freed me. "Well, I guess there's nothing tying me here anymore. Nothing tying him. Not me, not our history, not love. Just assets." My hands stayed still. My heart did not race. I had already crossed this emotional bridge alone. I nodded gently. "I suppose not." The next morning, I went to my attorney. It was time. We scheduled the final meeting. Told Michael there was one last document to sign regarding the house. Something procedural. Something boring. He agreed immediately. Too immediately. He arrived confident, casual. Already finished with me in his mind. The office smelled of leather and paper. The air felt heavy. My attorney greeted us politely and slid a folder across the table. Michael opened it, his brow furrowed. "This is not what I expected," he said. I folded my hands, read it. His eyes moved faster. His face changed. Confusion, then irritation, then disbelief. "There must be a mistake." "There is not," my attorney said calmly. He looked at me. For the first time in months, truly looked. "What is this?" This is clarity, I said. Everything remains under my control, permanently. Silence filled the room. His mask cracked. You said you lost everything. I said I tested the truth. The realization hit him slowly, like cold water. His posture stiffened. His jaw tightened. The son who had already moved on was suddenly standing before the consequences he never imagined. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. He had already revealed himself. And now he understood that his assumptions had cost him everything he thought he deserved. The room felt smaller the moment the truth settled into his chest. Not because the walls had moved, but because his certainty had collapsed. Michael stared at the papers like they had betrayed him. His fingers tightened around the edges until the folder bent slightly. He read the first page again, then the second, slower this time, desperate for a different meaning. There was none. His breathing changed, shallow, uneven. The confident man who had walked in minutes earlier was gone. In his place stood someone exposed, stripped of expectation and power. I watched it happen without speaking. I let the silence do the work. So this is a joke, he finally said. Some kind of lesson. I lifted my eyes, calm/steady. It is not a joke. It is the truth you avoided. He laughed, but the sound was brittle, forced, like glass cracking under pressure. You lied to me. I told you I lost everything, I replied. You showed me what that meant to you. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. That moment was not loud. It was not explosive. It was devastating in its quietness. Because humiliation does not always scream. Sometimes it sits heavy in the air, suffocating, undeniable. He pushed his chair back abruptly. You manipulated me. I nodded slowly. The way you have been measuring me. His face flushed. Anger tried to take control, but confusion kept pulling it back. He had rehearsed entitlement, not accountability. He had prepared for inheritance, not exposure. You planned this, he said. Yes, I answered. Because I needed certainty, and you gave it to me. The truth hit him then. Not just legally, emotionally, he had been seen fully, completely. And there was no version of this where he was the victim. His voice dropped. You were supposed to trust me. I trusted you with my heart, I said quietly. You trusted me with my assets. That was the line that broke him. He looked away, jaw clenched, eyes wet with something he did not want to name. Shame, not grief, not remorse. Shame for being discovered. For being exposed as smaller than he believed himself to be. I felt my body relax for the first time in months. My shoulders dropped, my breathing deepened. It was not joy, it was release. It's like setting down a weight I had been carrying alone. I gave you every chance to be my son, I continued. All you ever had to do was care when there was nothing to gain. He swallowed. Hard. I did care, he whispered. No, I said gently. You cared about outcome, not connection. That truth lingered between us. Sharp, clean, unavoidable. My attorney stood and handed him a copy of the final documents. He took them slowly, like they burned, like paper had become consequence. So that is it, he muttered. I get nothing. You get honesty, I replied. You get the opportunity to understand what you lost before it became permanent. He shook his head. You ruined everything. I felt no anger, only clarity. You measured love in inheritance. You ruined it yourself. That was the payoff. Not wealth, not victory. Recognition, he saw himself. The silence afterward was not awkward. It was necessary. He stood slowly, like a man walking out of a role he had never earned. His steps lacked confidence now. Each movement was heavier than the last. At the door, he stopped, did not turn around. You plan to leave me nothing, I spoke calmly. I plan to leave you truth. What you do with it is yours. He left without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft, final sound. Not dramatic, not violent. Final. I remained seated. My hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, from relief. My chest felt lighter than it had in years. I had defended my dignity. I had honored my own worth. I stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the world continued. Cars passed. The sky was clear, ordinary, beautiful. Justice did not roar. It breathed. And for the first time in a long time, so did I. I did not cry after he left. That surprised me. For years, I imagined that if I ever truly lost my son, grief would come like a storm. Loud, violent, uncontrollable. But what I felt was quieter, clearer, like a fog lifting after a long, exhausting night. The pain was still there, but it no longer owned me. It sat beside me instead of inside me. People talk about karma as if it is something dramatic, a punishment, a reward, a cosmic explosion of justice. But I learned that karma is often subtle. It is the moment someone is forced to look at themselves without the comfort of illusion. It is not about destruction. It is about revelation. Michael was not punished. He was exposed. And sometimes that is far heavier to carry. I did not forgive him. Not because I wanted revenge, but because forgiveness requires accountability. It requires truth. It requires humility. What he felt in that room was not remorse. It was shock. It was the collapse of entitlement. Oh, they're not the same thing. And I refused to cheapen my healing by pretending they were. I chose myself. That was the real revenge. For the first time in my life, I protected my dignity without apology. I did not soften my truth to preserve his comfort. I did not sacrifice my worth to maintain an image of motherhood that demanded endless tolerance. Love is not self-erasure. Love is not silence in the face of disrespect. Love is not surrender. I learned that being a mother does not mean being invisible. It does not mean being a bank account with a heartbeat. It does not mean absorbing betrayal quietly so others can feel secure. It means standing firm in your humanity, even when it is uncomfortable for those who benefited from your softness. My home feels different now. Lighter, calmer. It belongs to me again. Not as a future promise to someone else, but as a present truth to myself. I walk through it without feeling watched, without feeling measured, without feeling like I am slowly disappearing. That alone is priceless. I still think about him. Of course I do. But I think about him differently. Not as a child who needs saving, not as a man who deserves inheritance, but as a person responsible for his own choices. That boundary gave me peace. It reminded me that I am not responsible for who he became, only for who I allowed myself to remain. This story is not about money. It never was. It is about power, emotional power. The power to decide when enough is enough. The power to stop explaining yourself to people who only listen when profit is involved. The power to say, my worth is not negotiable. If there is a lesson here, it is simple and difficult at the same time. Pay attention to how people treat you when they think there is nothing left to gain. That version of them is the truth. That version of them is who you are really dealing with. I did not lose my son that day. I lost an illusion. And in return, I gained myself. There is strength in that trade. There is freedom in it. There is dignity in choosing clarity over comfort. I walked out of that chapter lighter, not because I won something material, but because I refused to be emotionally owned ever again. Some people call that revenge. I call it awakening. If this story stirred something inside you, if it reminded you of your own strength or your own boundaries, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us what justice looks like in your life. Subscribe for more powerful stories where truth always rises and dignity always wins.